Dadperfectrevenge. When I watched my daughter-in-law Amy try to cut through the lock on my storage unit with bolt cutters at 2 a.m., I knew everything I'd suspected for 3 years was about to be confirmed. She had no idea I was sitting in my truck across the street, watching her commit what would become the final piece of evidence I needed to destroy her completely. I'm Rick Anderson. I'm 58 years old, and I own a construction company here in Orange County. We run 4 crews and handle mostly residential contracts, everything from custom homes to major renovations. For the past 3 years, I've been documenting every move my son's wife has made against our family. Tonight was the night she finally revealed her true intentions, and tomorrow morning, her world was going to collapse. Let me start from the beginning. My son Steve brought Amy Patterson home for the first time about 4 years ago. Right away, something felt wrong. Not the usual protective father thing. I'd learned to handle that after my wife Patty died 8 years back. This was different. Amy was 28 then, pretty in that calculated way some women perfect. She knew exactly when to smile, exactly what questions to ask, exactly how to make you think she was genuinely interested in your answers. But I'd been in construction for 30 years. You learn to read people when your business depends on knowing who's trying to screw you over. That first dinner, she asked way too many questions about the business. How many crews did we run? What kind of contracts did we handle? Did we own our equipment outright? When I mentioned we had a good relationship with the bank, her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Steve's so lucky to have this security," she said, squeezing his hand. "Most guys our age don't have family businesses to fall back on, not contribute to, not help build, fall back on." Steve was completely blind to it. He'd been working for me since college, learning the trade from the ground up. Started with basic carpentry, moved up to project management. I'd been planning to make him a partner when he turned 35. Amy somehow picked up on those plans within the first month of dating him. I started keeping notes almost immediately. Nothing fancy, just a regular notebook I kept in my desk drawer at the office. Date, time, what Amy said or did that struck me as off. I told myself I was being paranoid, but my gut kept screaming that this woman was dangerous. The engagement happened fast. 8 months after that first dinner, Steve came to me all excited about proposing. I asked if he was sure he knew her well enough, and he gave me that look, the one that said I was being the overprotective father again. "Dad, you just need to get to know her better," he said. "Amy's amazing. She makes me want to be better." I didn't argue. Instead, I started paying closer attention. After they got married, the changes in Steve happened gradually. Amy was smart. She never pushed too hard at once. First, it was small. Suggestions. Maybe Steve should focus more on learning the business side instead of working with the crews. Maybe he should ask me about getting an office of his own at the company. Maybe it was time for him to have a real say in major decisions. Within 6 months, my son, who had always been eager to work alongside me, was suddenly questioning everything I did. Why didn't we expand into commercial work? Why weren't we taking on bigger contracts? Why was I so conservative with business decisions? The questions weren't coming from Steve. They were coming through Steve, straight from Amy. I upgraded to a better documentation system. I rented a storage unit downtown and started keeping detailed records there. Photos, printed emails, notes about conversations. I even bought a small recorder and started taping family dinners when Amy got comfortable enough to really show her hand. By year 2 of their marriage, the pattern was clear. Amy was systematically isolating Steve from me while gathering intelligence about our business assets. She'd convinced him that I was too controlling, too old-fashioned, too set in my ways to grow the company properly. "Dad, Amy thinks we should talk about succession planning," Steve said to me one Sunday. "You're not getting any younger, and if something happened to you, I wouldn't know how to handle everything." I was 56 years old and in perfect health, but Amy had Steve worried about my mortality. That's when I realized what she was really after. It wasn't just about money, it was about control, complete control, of the business, of Steve, and eventually, of me. I started varying my routines, taking different routes to work, parking in different spots. I installed security cameras at the business without telling anyone, including Steve. I had a feeling Amy's interest in our family legacy was about to get more direct. The breakthrough came in year 3, when my old friend Ted Morrison called me with information that changed everything. Ted had known our family for 20 years. He'd watched Steve grow up, been at both my wedding and Patty's funeral. Our church community had rallied around us after Patty passed, and Ted had been one of the most supportive. One afternoon, he overheard Amy at a coffee shop near downtown, talking on her phone to someone about dealing with the old man permanently. "Rick, she was talking about timelines," Ted told me, "about how much easier everything would be once you weren't in the picture anymore. And she mentioned something about your life insurance policy. That conversation changed everything. I realized I wasn't dealing with just a manipulative daughter-in-law anymore. I was dealing with someone who was planning something far more serious." That night, I went to the storage unit and looked through 3 years of documentation. The pattern wasn't just manipulation anymore, it was preparation. Amy had been positioning herself to inherit everything when I died. And based on that conversation, Ted overheard she wasn't planning to wait for natural causes. I called my lawyer, Phil Davidson, first thing the next morning. We reviewed all my documentation, hundreds of pages of notes, photos, recordings. Phil's face got grimmer with each piece of evidence. "Rick, this is conspiracy to commit fraud at minimum," he said. "Potentially conspiracy to commit murder. You need to take this to the police." "With what? Overheard conversations and suspicious behavior? They'll think I'm a paranoid old man who doesn't like his daughter-in-law." Phil shook his head. "You need more direct evidence, something undeniable." That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to let Amy make her move, but I'd be ready for her. I told Phil to prepare all the legal documentation to protect the business and Steve's inheritance from Amy's schemes. We set up additional trusts, updated my will, and made sure everything was bulletproof. I contacted Detective Gary Williams at the local PD and gave him a heads up about a potential case developing. And I started watching Amy's movements more carefully. The storage unit became my command center. Every evening after work, I'd stop by and update my files. I mapped out Amy's daily routines, her phone patterns, even her spending habits. Steve had no idea his wife was burning through money at an alarming rate. Money she was somehow accessing from accounts I didn't even know existed. I started noticing other things too. Amy had been asking Steve about my health more frequently. Did I seem tired lately? Was I eating well? Had I been to the doctor recently? She was building a narrative about my declining condition, preparing Steve for the idea that something might happen to me. The manipulation got more sophisticated. Amy started suggesting that I was becoming forgetful, that I was making poor business decisions, that maybe it was time for me to step back from day-to-day operations. She'd bring up incidents that never happened, twist conversations to make me look confused or unreliable. "Your dad seemed really disoriented when I talked to him yesterday," she'd tell Steve. "Maybe you should consider having him evaluated." I was 57 years old, sharp as ever, running a successful business with 4 full crews and a waiting list of clients. But Amy was systematically undermining my mental competency in Steve's mind. The financial investigation got more serious when I discovered Amy had been researching life insurance policies online. She'd printed out articles about policy payouts, beneficiary rights, and what happens when someone dies intestate. The papers were in Steve's home office, mixed in with his legitimate business documents. That's when I realized the full scope of her plan. Amy wasn't just hoping I'd die naturally so she could inherit through Steve. She was actively planning my death and had been preparing Steve psychologically for months. I hired a private investigator, a guy named Marcus. Torres, who'd done some work for our business in the past when we had problems with employee theft. Marcus followed Amy for 2 weeks and came back with evidence that made my blood run cold. Amy had been meeting regularly with contractors, not for renovation work, but to discuss how certain accidents could happen at construction sites. She'd researched my daily routines, my usual routes to and from work, even the safety protocols at our job sites. She was looking for the perfect opportunity to arrange an incident that would look completely natural. Marcus also discovered Amy's financial situation was worse than I'd imagined. She owed over $80,000 in credit card debt, had defaulted on a car loan, and had been borrowing money from loan sharks. The pressure was mounting, and she was getting desperate. "Mr. Anderson," Marcus told me, "this woman is planning to kill you within the next few months. The people she's been talking to, the research she's doing, the timeline she's working with. Everything points to imminent action." I felt a chill run down my spine, but also a strange sense of relief. After 3 years of suspicion and documentation, I finally had proof of what Amy really was. The question now was how to stop her without putting Steve through unnecessary trauma. The breakthrough came when Amy made a critical mistake. She'd been so focused on planning my demise that she got careless about covering her tracks. Steve found printouts about life insurance policies in their bedroom, along with handwritten notes about business succession and inheritance law. He called me, confused and worried. "Dad, I found some weird stuff in Amy's things. Papers about insurance and business ownership. What do you think this means?" I knew this was my chance. "Son, can you come over tonight? There's something I need to show you, something I've been keeping track of for a while." When Steve arrived at my house that evening, I pulled out a condensed version of my documentation. Not everything, that would have been too overwhelming, but enough to show the pattern. The timeline of Amy's questions, her research into our business, her attempts to isolate him from me. Steve's face went pale as he read through the evidence. "Dad, this looks like she's been planning something against you, against us. I think she has been, son, and I think we need to be very careful about what we do next." That conversation changed our entire dynamic. For the first time in 2 years, Steve and I were working together instead of being manipulated apart. We made a plan to gather more concrete evidence while protecting ourselves from whatever Amy was planning, but Amy was smarter than we gave her credit for. She sensed the shift in Steve's behavior, realized something had changed. That's when she decided to accelerate her timeline and make her move on the storage unit. I made my decision. It was time to force Amy's hand before she could execute whatever plan she was developing against me, or Steve. I started leaving the storage unit key visible on my desk at work. I made sure Amy saw me checking on important documents there during one of her surprise visits to the office. I mentioned to Steve, knowing Amy would overhear, that I kept all our most sensitive business records and insurance papers in a secure location off-site. I wanted her to know that whatever she was looking for was probably in that storage unit. The trap worked perfectly. 3 days later, the storage facility's security system alerted me that someone had been asking questions about my unit during business hours. The manager, a guy named Tim Foster, called me personally. "Mr. Anderson, a woman came by today claiming to be your daughter-in-law. She said there was a family emergency and she needed access to your unit. She had some story about important medical documents. I told her I couldn't help without proper authorization, but she seemed pretty determined. I thanked Tim and asked him to call me immediately if anyone showed up again asking about my unit. Then I called Detective Williams and told him to meet me at the storage unit the following evening. I had a feeling Amy would be back, and this time she wouldn't be asking permission. I was right. 2 nights later, at exactly 2:17 a.m., Amy Patterson returned with bolt cutters, a flashlight, and what looked like a crowbar. This time, she'd figured out how to get past the main gate, probably by following another tenant in earlier and hiding until after closing. I watched from my truck as she approached my unit and started working on the lock. But what Amy didn't know was that I'd installed a motion-activated camera inside the unit itself, and Detective Williams was parked 2 blocks away, waiting for my signal. As she finally cut through the lock and pulled open the unit door, Amy stepped into the most comprehensive evidence collection against her that she could have imagined. 3 years of documentation, hundreds of photos, recorded conversations, financial records showing her debts and spending patterns, a complete timeline of her manipulation of Steve and her plans against me. The unit was organized like a prosecutor's office, box after box of evidence, each labeled with dates and categories. Photos of Amy meeting with suspicious characters, printouts of her online research about insurance fraud and construction accidents, copies of her credit card statements showing her desperate financial situation. She spent 10 minutes searching through boxes, looking for insurance papers or business documents she could use or destroy. What she found instead were files labeled with her name, containing evidence of every crime she'd committed or planned. When she realized what she was looking at, Amy tried to destroy the evidence. She started pulling out files and photographs, preparing to burn them with a lighter she'd brought. That's when I called Detective Williams and walked up to the storage unit, myself. "Looking for something specific, Amy?" She spun around, lighter in one hand, my documentation in the other. For the first time in 4 years, I saw her without the mask. No calculated smile, no fake concern, just pure rage and desperation. "You've been spying on me," she said. "This is harassment. Steve will never forgive you for this." "Steve already knows about all of this," I replied calmly. He's seen the evidence. He understands exactly what you've been planning. That was a lie. Steve knew some of it, but not the extent of Amy's criminal intentions. But I wanted to see how she'd react to the idea that her manipulation had been completely exposed. Amy's face twisted with fury. You don't understand what you've done. I needed that money. I needed this to work. You needed what to work, Amy? Your plan to kill me? Your scheme to steal my business through my son? He deserves better than what you're giving him, she screamed. That business should be his now, not when you decide to hand it over, and you're too stubborn to die naturally. There it was, a full confession, and I was recording every word on my phone. Detective Williams arrived with backup just as Amy tried to make a run for it. They found the bolt cutters, the crowbar, and most importantly, they found her purse containing building plans of my business property, handwritten notes about my insurance policy, and contact information for the man she'd been meeting with to discuss accidents. Amy was arrested on charges of breaking and entering, attempted burglary, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence was overwhelming, but the hardest part was still ahead of me. I had to tell Steve the full truth about what his wife had been planning. The next morning, Detective Williams and I sat down with Steve in my living room. I pulled out the complete documentation, 3 years of evidence showing not just Amy's manipulation tactics, but her active planning to kill me and steal our family business. Steve read through page after page in stunned silence. The timeline of Amy's questions, the financial records showing her desperate situation, the meeting notes with contractors discussing construction accidents, the research into life insurance payouts and business inheritance law. Dad, he said finally, his voice breaking, she was really going to kill you. This wasn't just about money or control. She was planning murder. Son, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this. Steve looked up at me with tears in his eyes. You did protect me, Dad. You protected both of us. If you hadn't been documenting all this, if you hadn't been patient enough to gather real evidence, she might have succeeded. That's when I realized the full importance of what those 3 years of careful documentation had accomplished. It wasn't just about catching Amy in the act. It was about protecting my son from spending the rest of his life married to someone who was capable of murder. The legal proceedings moved quickly once Detective Williams had all the evidence. Amy's lawyer tried to argue that she was just a desperate woman who'd gotten in over her head. But the documentation I'd gathered painted a clear picture of premeditated conspiracy. The man Amy had been meeting with, a guy named Carlos Martinez, who had no relation to her despite sharing the last name, turned out to have a criminal record involving insurance fraud and staged accidents. When faced with Amy's recorded confessions and the evidence of their meetings, he agreed to testify against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. Amy's plea bargained down to 8 years in prison. She admitted to planning my murder to collect life insurance money and inherit the business through Steve. The judge was particularly harsh during sentencing, noting that Amy had not only planned to commit murder, but had systematically manipulated and emotionally abused her husband as part of her scheme. Mrs. Patterson, the judge said, you didn't just plan to kill Mr. Anderson. You spent years destroying the relationship between a father and son, isolating your husband from his family, and preparing him psychologically for your crime. This level of manipulation and premeditation warrants the maximum sentence under the plea agreement. Steve filed for divorce immediately. With Amy's criminal conviction, she had no claim to any of our assets or business interests. Our lawyer Phil had done his job well. Every document was bulletproof, every asset protected. But the real work started after the legal proceedings ended. Steve and I had to rebuild our relationship from the ground up. 3 years of Amy's manipulation had done serious damage to the trust and communication we'd always shared. Steve started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, who specialized in helping people recover from psychological manipulation. She helped him understand how Amy had used classic isolation and control tactics to turn him against me. Dad, I can't believe I fell for it, Steve said to me one evening about 2 months after Amy's sentencing. She made me think you were the problem. She convinced me that you didn't trust me, that you were trying to control my life. Son, she was a professional manipulator. This is what she did for a living. Find successful men and work their way into their families. You couldn't have known. But I should have listened to you. I should have seen the signs. That's when I realized Steve needed to understand something important about the whole experience. Steve, the reason I spent 3 years documenting instead of confronting was because I knew Amy had turned you against me. If I'd come to you in year one with accusations and suspicions, what would you have done? He thought about it for a moment. I would have defended her. I would have thought you were being paranoid and controlling. Exactly. So I had to wait. I had to gather evidence. That was so overwhelming, so undeniable, that even someone who loved her couldn't ignore it. That's what real protection looks like sometimes. It's not dramatic confrontations or emotional appeals. It's patient, careful work that builds a case strong enough to survive in court. Our church community was incredibly supportive throughout the recovery process. Ted Morrison organized meals and prayer sessions. Other business owners in our network shared their own stories of family betrayals and financial threats. It helped Steve understand that what happened to us wasn't unique. Predators like Amy target successful families all the time. The construction business actually got stronger during this period. Steve threw himself into work with a new appreciation for what we'd built together. He started taking on more responsibility, learning the financial side of operations, and developing relationships with our long-term clients. I understand now why you wanted me to earn partnership. Instead of just handing it to me, he told me about 6 months after Amy's conviction. She made me think I was entitled to immediate ownership, but I wasn't ready for that responsibility. You're getting ready for it now, I replied. And when you do become partner, it'll be because you've earned it, not because someone manipulated you into demanding it. It's been a year since Amy's arrest now. Steve is doing well. He's dating a nice woman named Jennifer, who works as an elementary school teacher, and has no interest in our business beyond supporting Steve's career. He's learned to recognize manipulation tactics and red flags in relationships. The storage unit is empty now. All the evidence is in police custody or with our lawyer. But I learned something important during those 3 years of documentation and waiting. Sometimes protecting your family means being patient. It means gathering evidence instead of making accusations. It means letting dangerous people reveal themselves completely before you act. And sometimes it means accepting that the people you love might not understand your methods until they can see the full picture. Amy Patterson thought she was smarter than me. She thought she could manipulate my son, steal my business, and eliminate me without consequences. She had no idea that every move she made was being documented, every plan she formed was being recorded, every crime she contemplated was building the case that would destroy her. The storage unit wasn't just where I kept evidence. It was where I kept hope. Hope that someday Steve would see the truth. Hope that justice would prevail. Hope that our family would survive Amy's attempt to destroy us. And in the end, that hope was enough. Steve and I are closer now than we've been in years. Our business is thriving. Our community supported us through the worst of it. And other fathers who've heard our story have reached out to share their own experiences with recognizing and documenting manipulation in their families. That's the real lesson here. If you see something wrong in your family, document it. Be patient, build your case, and trust that the truth, when it's properly presented, will always win in the end. Sometimes the greatest act of love is the patience to gather truth instead of demanding immediate belief. Because real protection requires evidence that survives beyond emotion. A father's job isn't just to warn his children about danger, but to build cases so strong that justice can step in when love alone isn't enough to keep them safe.